I am so happy to welcome to the show Professor Avi Loeb from Harvard University. Sir, you are like the guy that one would go to on any of this. I've spoken to you in the past, and I know you have a lot of very firm beliefs, and including that, in fact, we have experienced alien encounters here on Earth already. I want to get to that. And you've got a new book, by the way, coming out. We can talk about that as well. Interstellar, which you can pre-order right now on Amazon, Amazon.com. But Professor Loeb, I mean, this is quite something to hear from somebody in an intelligence capacity. Someone who is not underestimated as a source. The reporting by the journalists that covered this, they were the ones who did some pretty meaty reporting back on the whole issue back in 2017 in terms of just letting us know that the government was spending money on this research. What's your reaction?
Well, the Earth is encountering objects from interstellar space. We know that because there is a meteor that was identified in 2014 by US government sensors that, in fact, this summer I'm going to search for in the Pacific Ocean. And we know it for a decade that there was an object collided with Earth, roughly half a meter in size, and had material strength much tougher than all the space rocks we had seen. So it could be potentially a spacecraft.
Ooh, is it because you didn't recognize the material in the? I mean, why a spacecraft and not a meteor? Or
because the NASA catalog of meteors include 273 objects over the past decade, and this one happens to be the first one from interstellar space that was identified by me and my students. We discovered it, yet it's the toughest. It maintained its integrity all the way to the lower atmosphere of the Earth, while other meteors explode much higher in the atmosphere. So they don't have the material strength of this one. That's what makes us suspicious that it may be made of materials that are not the same as a solar system rock.
And nobody's actually gotten to get a sample of those materials before.
That's why I'm willing to spend a couple of weeks on a boat where we develop machinery that will allow us to scoop the ocean floor and look for the fragments from this meteor, and we'll bring whatever we find back to Harvard University and then analyze it. And our data will be completely open to the public. And whatever we find, we'll let people know whether it's made of some unusual material that is natural, or maybe it's stainless steel or some artificial alloy that we've never seen before. So
is that what you're looking for, by the way, in terms of what specifically in terms of this object on the bottom of the ocean floor in the Pacific, or whether you're using telescopes to try and figure out what else is that? I mean, you're looking for space artifacts that would give you some inkling that this is not from here?
Yeah, so in fact, for 70 years, we've been searching for radio signals and light from extraterrestrial technological civilizations. And that may be the wrong approach, because it's like waiting for a phone call. Nobody may call you. And a better approach might be to go out to your backyard and search for objects that may have been thrown by your neighbors in your direction. And interestingly, the rockets that we launch to space are moving too slow to escape from the gravitational pull of the Milky Way galaxy. So they will remain bound. You know, they keep accumulating over time in the Milky Way. All the probes that were sent by other civilizations over billions of years keep adding up, and we could find them in principle, just like you find plastics in the ocean. You know, they keep accumulating over time. So the idea is to search for objects. Now, this week we heard a testimony from David Grusch that in fact the government found materials that they are studying that we are not aware of. He didn't provide any material evidence for that. And as a scientist, you know, I only abide by what the evidence or the data looks like, and not by testimonies. But he actually testified under oath about this subject. And legally speaking, you know, he is held accountable for what he says. So it would be interesting to see what the hearings in Congress will reveal, will unveil. This is interesting.
And by the way, just to add to that, you actually have worked with the government. I was reading your paper, which is still under peer review, but the draft of it, Physical Constraints on Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, and you did this in conjunction with the Pentagon, with Sean Kirkpatrick over there. I guess this was all based on information that was not classified. So given your experience working with the Pentagon and given what you heard from the intel officer, I hear you. You actually want to see the evidence and see what he's talking about, but does it add up in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah. So in July 2021, I established and I currently lead the Galileo Project, which aims to collect more data on unidentified anomalous objects that the government talks about. The Director of National Intelligence reported to Congress, and as a result, this All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, was established, and Sean Kirkpatrick is the head of that office, and that is under the Department of Defense. So you have this organization that was established a year after the Galileo Project. The Galileo Project already has a working observatory that is monitoring the sky 24/7. And over the past month, I received the interest from 5 donors who are willing to fund copies of this observatory that is currently working at Harvard University and put them in different locations. So the hope is that in the coming year or two, we will have tens of these observatories and get much better data with calibrated instruments that would help us figure out the nature of these unidentified objects. And AARO is aiming to do the same thing based on reports from the past. So they are analyzing past reports that were completely anecdotal. We are doing a systematic survey, which is much better because we are looking at the entire sky in the infrared, optical, radio, and audio, and using artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms to classify objects, whether they're natural, like birds, or whether they're human-made, like balloons, or airplanes, or maybe it's something else. So we try to figure it out.
And so let's get into that something else for a second. Humor me, because, look, there's been a lot of balloon sightings as of late. And I think that a lot of people have just kind of dismissed, unfairly, by the way, and I know you're very passionate about that, and we can talk about that. They've dismissed this as this sort of science fiction stuff, and they roll their eyes when they think about the talk of any extraterrestrial or alien activity. But you've devoted your career to this. You've had this founding, I believe, off the coast of New Guinea, which you're going to, and forgive me on the pronunciation. Is it Oumuamua?
Oh, that's the second object. So the first one is the meteor I mentioned, 0.5 meter in size, that exploded in the Earth's atmosphere, produced a fireball. The government discovered it. The second object was found 4 years later in October 2017, and it was called Oumuamua. It was found by astronomers, never collided with Earth. It was just passing by, much bigger, 200 times bigger, the size of a football field, and was detected as a result of the reflection of sunlight from it, and using conventional astronomical telescopes. And it appeared weird. It was most likely flat, disc-like, and was pushed away from the sun by reflecting sunlight. And 3 years later, the same telescope in Hawaii that discovered Oumuamua found another object that was pushed away from the sun by reflecting sunlight without any evaporation, no cometary tail. It was not a comet. And that one, the second one in 2020, September 2020, ended up being a rocket booster that NASA launched in 1966. So we know it was artificial because we produced it, NASA produced it. The question is, who produced Oumuamua? So currently we have the 2 first interstellar objects, this meteor, which was unusual in material strength, and Oumuamua, which was weird in its shape, and also the fact that it was thin, pushed away from the sun without cometary tail. And so both of them are not familiar, unlike the space rocks that we are familiar with. And the question is, what are they? And that's what brought me to the subject to establish the Galileo Project. And we are looking at objects near Earth and objects far away to see if any of them are technological in origin. So then comes Grusch and says there is a secretive program within government, within the Department of Defense, the same organization that established AARO in response to the US Congress. And you ask yourself, how is that possible? So AARO issued a public statement saying we don't have any evidence for an extraterrestrial origin of materials. After interviewing a couple of dozen of witnesses, we don't have any evidence for the kind of materials that Grusch is talking about. And you ask yourself, well, both of them speak about things that the Department of Defense is doing. And one possible way to interpret that is that both of them speak honestly, in the sense that the organization that Grusch is speaking about is actually has a higher security clearance. So it's separate, and it operates with the private sector, with companies that are looking into materials that were retrieved by the governments over the decades. Whereas Aero is a recent organization that was established in response to Congress, and it's sort of saying what DOD wants it to say, which is basically that the evidence it has access to is not convincing in any way and is not related to anything extraterrestrial.
Right. And they just don't have perhaps the clearance levels that maybe Grusch did.
Exactly.
Have you talked to Grusch at all about this? Has he called you up? I mean, you were my first call. I said to the producer, I said, let's see if we can get Professor Loeb to come on and talk about all this, because it seems to me you'd want to go to the source of the guy who's, at the top of this industry and investigating it and devoting his career to this. Have you spoken with him about his findings?
No, I did not speak with him, but I spoke with people who know him extremely well. And in fact, we had a discussion about this entire story within the Galileo Project just an hour ago. And with people who are familiar with some background information. And the point of the matter is that, there is more to be found. He did not have access to the primary sources of evidence. He just is reporting about hearsay, about documents that he may have seen. But that's not a substitute to the actual materials or the evidence. And science cannot be based on eyewitness testimonies. The legal system is based, because the legal system deals with interactions between humans. So you have to listen to what humans tell you at the court of law. But in the context of science, I cannot write a paper saying Grusch said this and that. That's not evidence. And what we want to have access to is the actual materials, or So if it exists, I hope the government will eventually release some indications to what it might contain. But
and by the way, just to remind the listeners, if you're tuning in right now, we're talking with Professor Avi Loeb from Harvard University, who is the founder of the Galileo Project and the world expert, basically, on the potential for alien existence. And I believe, sir, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're pretty convinced that they're out there, and we just have to find them. And it may have even been billions of years ago, right? Like some of these artifacts that we're finding now could have been sent a long time ago.
Yeah, the thing to keep in mind is that most of the stars formed before the sun by billions of years. And our modern science and technology is only 1 century old. We learned about quantum mechanics, which is used in all of our gadgets, on the internet, artificial intelligence, everything uses quantum mechanics. We learned about it just a century ago. And given the fact that other civilizations may have preceded us by billions of years, that gave them a huge advantage technologically relative to us. And that may explain why they are visiting us while we haven't visited them.
Do you think that they're still in existence, or do you think that this is, 2 billion years ago and, they're no longer in existence? Perhaps something happened, and it's important that we learn and understand that, because we want to obviously prevent ourselves from making similar mistakes.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. We know for sure that eventually, within 1 billion years, 20% of the age of the Earth, the sun will become too hot to allow liquid water on the surface of Earth. So we will basically, through a greenhouse effect, all the liquid water on the surface of Earth will evaporate. So we couldn't stay here. And if other stars reach that point already, because they formed billions of years before the sun, then there must have been cries for help from civilizations who were left, on the planet as it burns up. And they might have tried to go in an exodus on spaceships, but we were not around billions of years to hear their cries for help. And so it's possible that a lot of technological civilizations perished by now. But it doesn't really matter. If you're looking for packages in your mailbox, the sender may be dead. If you are looking for the sender to call you on the phone, of course, that entity needs to be still active, and that's what we've been doing for 70 years. But it's much better to look for packages that arrive by mail because the sender is not needed.
So you're talking about thinking about it in a different way. I mean, I think, I remember there were 9 planets when I was in school, right? As a little kid, that's what we learned. But, obviously the world's changed a whole lot and we've learned a lot since then. And we continue learning every single day. It's amazing. And with the new telescopes and the James Webb telescope, it's just incredible, right? What we are learning every minute, every moment. So it really does expand your world. But in terms of how we approach it from a scientific perspective, do you ever worry like we're doing kind of one and the same? Like we're looking for the same stuff. You mentioned we're waiting for that call, right? We're waiting for them to show up. And maybe we need to think about it differently. Do we really need to look for oxygen in water or maybe something else?
No, that's what the astronomy community is trying to do, to look for fingerprints in the atmospheres of other planets. But it may well be that objects near Earth are the best approach. And the reason I say that is because I did a simple calculation. We are spending $2 trillion every year on military budgets. If we were to allocate the same amount of money to space exploration, because we decided to listen to John Lennon, who said, imagine all the people living in peace. And so we decided not to waste our funds on fighting each other, trying to kill each other, trying to protect us from other nations, so forth. If we did that, we could send, by the end of this century, a probe to every star in the Milky Way galaxy, billions of them, tens of billions of them. It's not that expensive. If we can do it by the end of this century, using the money we allocate to military budgets, someone else may have done it already. And it takes less than 1 billion years for chemical rockets of the type that we used, like Voyager, Pioneer, New Horizons. Those will traverse the Milky Way galaxy in less than 1 billion years. So they could have reached us by now if they did it more than 1 billion years ago. And the question is, are they around? And we haven't searched. You see, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy to say we need extraordinary evidence without seeking the evidence. That's what the scientific community was doing until now. The Galileo Project is the first scientific project that is actually trying to search for such evidence. And the reason I decided to go in this direction is because the first interstellar objects, 2 of them, the meteor and Oumuamua, didn't look familiar.
Wow. So what do you think is out there? I just, what sort of your gut tell you? What compels you to keep doing this work? What do you think we don't know?
There is a lot that we don't know. We don't know what most of the matter in the universe is. We call it dark matter simply because we don't see it. We don't know what the vacuum that fills up the universe is made of. We call it dark energy because we don't understand it. We don't know what happened before the Big Bang, what created our universe. And we don't know when life started in the universe. And we don't know what's inside black holes, what happens in the centers of black holes when we throw materials into them. So there is a lot that we don't know. And obviously, if we find a smarter kid in our cosmic block, we could ask them. But what I'm trying to say is that there is a lot to be learned, and we can learn it by studying what other civilizations may have learned. And so it actually is worth checking if there is any visitor in our backyard. And in my last class at Harvard, I asked the students, suppose we find a gadget and it has buttons on it. Would you press a button? So half of my class said, no way, I'm worried about the consequences of what will happen to society, what will happen to my body if I press a button and it happens to create a catastrophe. And the other half of the class said, actually, I'm very curious to see what happens. Maybe it's GPT 100 and it will give me an answer to an important question. And then one of the students asked me, what would I do? And I said, well, I'll just bring it to a laboratory and study it as if it was an intelligent creature that went through a trauma. And before I engage with it physically, I want to understand it, figure out what it's made of. So, there is a possibility that we'll go to the Pacific Ocean and find a gadget. I promised the Museum of Modern Art in New York City that I'll bring it for display in that case, because it will represent modernity for humanity.
When are you actually going? I know that's happening this summer.
Yes.
So you'll be there like July, August, and do you anticipate having any answers in any, how long does it take to actually analyze everything and get a sense of whether this is recognizable stuff or not?
In July and August, we will indeed analyze it. I will be there before. And I have a regular column on medium.com. If you just put Avi Loeb, medium.com, you can find it, and I'll maintain a diary of the expedition so you can follow what happens.
So you'll update it.
Quite exciting.
It sounds very exciting. And of course, you've got the new book coming out, and it sounds like what you're telling us in terms of what Grusch said was there may be some there. And if there is some there, hey, you want to know about it, right? Because the scientific community should be included, and it's for the betterment, hopefully, of our whole society. Do you think that there's fear? I mean, why wouldn't we know more? Why wouldn't you as a scientist know more? Is there, if this is true, just fear of this information getting out, fear about competitors, fear about, how is the public going to interpret this?
Well, we tend to think that we are at the center of the universe, that we are physically at the center. That was the initial belief. And then Copernicus and Galileo realized the Earth is moving around the sun. That was a shock. The church put Galileo in house arrest, but eventually admitted that they were wrong. Mm-hmm. Okay. We now see it from a distance. We can see the Earth moving around the sun from a distant spacecraft. Mm-hmm. So we know it's true. And we are not at the center of the stage. The other thing we know is that Homo sapiens that predated us, they emerged about a few million years ago. And that's, thousands of times shorter than the age of Earth or the age of the universe, Sure. And, so we know that we came only at the end of the cosmic play and that we are not at the center of stage. So it's quite simple. If you arrive at the play, you are not at the center of the stage, and you arrive just at the end of the play is not about you. Okay, so that's the message. I call it cosmic modesty. We are supposed to be modest in the sense of admitting we are not necessarily the smartest. And guess what? GPT-5 might be potentially.
Okay, so this is very interesting because we've been talking a lot about GPT, and GPT is amazing. And a lot of what I'm reading suggests that, hey, you got to be careful here because GPT could take over the world. And you've referred to it now several times. Artificial intelligence. I mean, I'm just explain to me what you mean. Like you're talking about a gadget and you want to understand the gadget. So the gadget's not a living thing. It's a form of artificial intelligence created by, theoretically, people maybe like us, right? I don't know. But where are you going with it? Because it's like, I'll tell you a funny story. I had an author on the program recently who was a former, actually he got a PhD in AI like back in the 70s before anybody he said was really interested in AI, and wound up becoming a very, very successful entrepreneur and computer programmer. He said, I've written enough code. I want to give back. I'm writing these fiction novels, science fiction novels. This was a while, he was writing these a couple of years ago, and it's the storyline is that the AIs are taking over the world effectively. And fast forward to today, and kind of here we are. When you say AI or GPT-5, like what exactly do you mean?
Yeah, very simply, when we find a civilization that produced products that are far more advanced than we can right now, it will give us a glimpse at our future. Okay, so that can do two things. First of all, those civilizations that arrive to us are the more successful ones. There must have been a lot that were not that successful. Mm-hmm. They were not as smart. They did not promote their longevity as much. And therefore, we would not see them. So there is a selection here. And the hope is that we can learn from that because it will inspire us. It will tell us something about what our future could be like. First, we will see something that is unfamiliar, just, like cave dwellers going to New York City. They won't be able to understand what's going on there, and that is just a separation by maybe 10,000 years, okay, in human history between cave dwellers and where we are right now. So just imagine ancient people visiting us now. They would look at us and think that we are, in contact with miraculous gadgets, and they would be at awe, sort of like religious awe. So I would say finding those things could potentially unify religion with science, because religion was talking about miracles. And just think about Moses, okay? In the biblical story, he saw a burning bush, which was supposed to be a miracle that convinces him to believe in God. And Moses looked at it and said, wow, that's remarkable. But if the Galileo Project existed at Moses' times, we could have put infrared sensors around the burning bush, measure the surface temperature of the burning bush, measure the distance to the burning bush and the amount of energy that it produces per unit time, and advise Moses whether this is a natural bush that is burning unusually well, or maybe it was produced by a superhuman entity. Okay, so we could use science to advise Moses whether this is a miracle from our vantage point, because this is a technology that we don't recognize. What I'm trying to say is a very advanced scientific civilization is a good approximation to God.
Very true. I guess where I'm going is, does that civilization eventually become sort of all machine based? I mean, I've seen some accounts, that, and I think in some of your writing, you've talked about the dandelions, right? And effectively like little bots. I'm not saying this in any correct science term, that are out there gathering information,
right?
And not people, not flesh and blood.
The reason is simple, because we developed on Earth by natural selection, and we are used to the conditions on the surface of this rock that has an atmosphere, has liquid water. Once you put people in space, conditions are so different and hazardous to the human health that I cannot imagine humans exploring interstellar space, because with chemical rockets, it would take us 50,000 years to reach the nearest star. So that's a huge amount of time, and there would be wars on the spacecraft. There are lots of science fiction stories about it. By the way, I don't like science fiction because it often violates the laws of physics. So because the journey is so long, and because of the bombardment by cosmic rays and these harsh conditions in space, the darkness and so forth, I don't expect biological creatures to survive such journeys. It makes much more sense to send technological products. And I'm very proud of our technological products in the form of our artificial intelligence, 3D printers. They can go places and replicate themselves, by the way. You can have self-replicating machines, automata, the way that John von Neumann envisioned before the double helix structure of DNA was discovered. And so biology does it. Biology, as you mentioned, there are dandelion seeds sent by a flower, and then they create more flowers like it. So you don't actually need to send billions of probes to space. You can send just a few that will replicate themselves, and then exponentially the population would grow. Just like in biology, you will end up with probes everywhere very quickly. So that's an approach that could have been taken. We just don't know if it's in principle possible that they visited Mars, they visited the Earth. By the way, on Mars, we've been looking at the surface, but the surface, since Mars lost its liquid water, the surface was bombarded by so many asteroids. There were more than 20 times the Hiroshima bomb energy released by asteroids impacting every square kilometer on Mars. So anything on the surface must have been demolished, turned into dust. But there are these caves that are called lava tubes that you find in Hawaii, for example, caused by lava that develops a crust on top, and then you get a tunnel underneath because the lava flows clears it up. So you end up with a cave. What I'm interested in is going to Mars and checking those caves for any markings on the wall that may have been produced by, intelligent creatures over there, because Mars lost its atmosphere only 2 billion years ago, at the middle of its life. And if life progressed twice as fast on Mars than it did on Earth, you could have had things like us on Mars before we came on Earth, just a few billion years ago. And in that case, if we see anything that is technological, it could be the products of those creatures. And I think in those lava tubes, you can, in principle, find any relics left behind.
Wow. Have you talked to Elon Musk about this? I mean, by the way, how do you do it, right? You've got Harvard University behind you, but I would imagine you got to find some deep pockets to help with this research. Who's most interested in this? Is it at a corporate level, government level, individual level?
So far, no government funding, but what happened was I released my book, Extraterrestrial. Now I have a new book called Interstellar coming out in August 2023. So when my book came out, there was huge amount of interest. It was mostly about Oumuamua. I had 3,000 interviews since then, 2.5 years ago. And
I was one of them, by the way. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. I was so fascinated with everything you said.
Thank you. And then a lot of wealthy individuals approached me. And that includes also the funding of this expedition. I basically said, we need to go to the Pacific Ocean. We need $1.5 million. A couple of months.
Oh, that's not. I mean, that's $1.5 million, and to think what you could find.
Yeah. So a couple of months later, I had a Zoom call where someone said, "You have the money."
That's great.
And, so that's the way I was funded so far, and there is a huge amount of interest. And
Sure.
this can be understood because 2/3 of the Americans believe in extraterrestrial intelligence, and less than half believe in God. So if you just select randomly people that have money, many of them are really curious about these questions. And now with Grusch's testimony, I very much hope that more will fund the scientific inquiry into this.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't think that, for those of my listeners that are watching and listening, and we have a lot of people that are very deeply religious, I don't think the two have to be, I heard what you said earlier, and I agree with you. I think that they can work together. I don't think it's, like they're mutually exclusive, but it is.
I should tell you that there were two rabbis that sent me an email after my book came out, and they said that they gave a sermon for the high holidays about my book. And you ask yourself, why would religious people care about it? And I think there is a common thread between spirituality and the frontiers of science, in the sense that you are exploring the unknown. And, I'm always at awe with nature. I don't care how many likes I have on social media, that's irrelevant. So I think that there are greater powers that nature possesses than we appreciate. And that's why we shouldn't pay too much attention to groupthink, to herd mentality, to what other people say on social media. It's much more relevant to listen to nature.
What do you think about all these sightings over the years? And I'll tell you, you've probably heard about incident at Exeter, incident over Exeter. Maybe you heard about Barney and Betty Hill. Quick funny story. So they were from my hometown in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where I grew up. And word had kind of gotten out, actually. Barney and Betty Hill they thought, seen what they believed to be an alien encounter, and they got taken up in a spaceship. This would have been in the 60s. And they were concerned about some of the after effects. I guess they had some headaches, and somehow it came up in their Unitarian church group in Massachusetts, and it made its way to a reporter. And the reporter was going to publish the story. And my father, actually, who was a small town lawyer, represented them, because they did not want the story in the paper. And so he tried to keep it out. Barney Hill was very worried he was going to lose his job at the post office because everybody was going to think he was crazy. And my father has said, many times, look, it wasn't my job to decide whether they were telling the truth or not, but the truth is they believe they were telling the truth. And the psychiatrists that worked with them as they tried to unravel all this believe they were telling the truth. I'm just curious, given your scientific approach, all these people that say, I saw something or I had this encounter, what do you make of that?
I make of that we need better evidence, that it's in fact very intriguing. That's why I dedicate most of my time to the search. So I take it very seriously, but to convince the mainstream, those people that didn't witness it, we cannot use hearsay. We have to get photographs, we have to get materials. And if the government has that, let us all see it.
Yes.
If not, let us get it ourselves. And I think it will change the way we think about our future, and maybe it will bring us together, because we would realize that it makes little sense for us to feel superior relative to each other. We are all equal members of the human species. There is someone better than us might be out there, and we can learn from them. And so I think that could be one thing that will save humanity, because we keep fighting with each other on things that are not particularly important in the big scheme of things. When you look at the universe, it's so big, the time is so long, that what we care about on the surface of this rock that we were born on is really not, should not be our main focus.
Well, that for sure is true. For sure is true. And there's so much out there. And I'm blown away talking to you. I appreciate your time. I encourage people to go check out the book, Interstellar. It's coming out in August, but you can get it now on Amazon, and the blog as well. You said medium.com. You're going to be blogging from the site as you try and uncover these artifacts. It's just amazing. We'd love to talk to you again, Professor Loeb, when you get back.
I will be delighted to speak with you, and everything. When you speak with me, what you see is what you get. I'm completely open about and transparent about what we find. So in difference from things we hear about the government, where things are hidden behind the veil of secrecy, we're trying to bring fresh air to this discussion and conversation. And by shedding more light on past reports, we would hopefully have a better future, because we will adapt to the reality that we all live. It's sort of learning about the fact that you have neighbors, so then you behave differently.
In other words, it's not just Russia and China out there, which is what I think, a lot of people in the intelligence and, at one level will try and say, okay, like these are just spycraft.
I should tell you, Elon Musk made a comment at an interview recently where he said that, he's a space guy. He knows everything about space, and he would know if aliens visited us. And
he said that?
He said that. And I listened to that and thought to myself, well, the region that he's aware of is just around the orbit of the Earth around the sun. Okay, so that's the region. It's a quadrillion times smaller than the size of the universe. It's 1 part in 10 to the power 15 of the size of the universe. So it's sort of like having an ant explore the head of a pin and trying to make a statement about the most distant planet in the solar system. That's the ratio of scales. This would be a very presumptuous ant.
Oh, yeah.
And so
I'm actually surprised he said that, because I kind of would think that he, of all people, would have the humility to understand, given his interest, right, in space, that we're not the be all end all. I've spoken with Richard Branson about this in the past, and he's emphatic that absolutely there's something else out there, and wants to understand it better.
I met with Richard on his island just a couple of months ago, and yes, indeed, he was very fascinated. I gave a lecture about my research, and and then I do think that everyone cares about this subject.
Unless Elon's just thinking about his space tourism, right? He's like, nobody's going to want to go to Mars if they think there's other people up there.
All I'm saying is that there must be a lot of entrepreneurs on other habitable planets out there. Maybe, there were millions of them, like Elon Musk, that explored space. That's all I'm saying. He sent Tesla, the car that he owned, he sent it to space. Okay, so there must be a lot of Teslas from other civilizations out there. That's all I'm saying. So
And you want to find them.
you should feel happy about it, because
What does it
perhaps,
really cost? Like, I hear you. You should be happy because like it's some reassurance. But you never know. Big egos. They don't want it.
well,
Other Teslas out there.
all I'm
But
saying, you're not supposed to be an alpha male
yeah,
in the universe. That is inappropriate.
what does it cost really? Like, I mean, I know you mentioned the money we spend on military, and we all know that's not really going to happen anytime soon. But if they devoted a little bit to this, could we make much more progress?
Well, there are two aspects to it. One is the scientific inquiry, the scientific research. And, the biggest science projects cost about $10 billion, like the James Webb Space Telescope, like the Large Hadron Collider.
Mhm.
For the Galileo Project to accomplish its goals of getting good enough statistics about unidentified anomalous objects, we need just 1% of that. At most, $100 million. That's nothing.
No, I
1%
think you
of
could get
science
that from
projects.
10
Now,
from 10 folks.
the second thing is, if you ask yourself, okay, suppose we find something, what would it take us to imitate them? I call it the imitation game, which, Alan Turing invented about 90 years ago in the context of AI imitating humans. The way I see the imitation game is more about us humans imitating AIs that came from extraterrestrials. Okay. So if we want to do the same and basically visit other planets, of course, it will take a long time to get there, but at least start the process of sending our packages to their mailboxes. Okay. If we wanted to do that, as I said, we just need to allocate our military budget for several decades until the end of this century. We will be able to send a package to every habitable mailbox within the Milky Way galaxy.
And we haven't gotten to the other galaxies.
That's a separate matter that I wrote a scientific paper about. How far can we go? The universe is not just expanding, it's expanding at an accelerated rate. So, in other words, the expansion speed is growing over time. And it means that you cannot reach a very far away destination because it runs away from you. Eventually, it will run away from us faster than light.
So it's infinite. Hey, how did you get interested in this? Can I just ask? And I was reading some more about you. One of your proteges actually, it does attend a school that I used to go to, New England Conservatory. He's doing a double major. I saw in piano, New England Conservatory and Harvard. And he's quite young. And I just wondered how you got interested in all of this.
Oh, I'm just guided by evidence. There was this object of Oumuamua that looked weird. I didn't expect it. And, other people.
But even before, like for you to have gone into this field looking for something bigger.
That's because I'm behaving like a kid. Basically, I'm curious and I'm not pretending to know more than I know. Because when I was a child, the biggest frustration I had was coming to a dinner table and asking a difficult question and seeing all the adults in the room dismissing the question because they didn't know the answer. And that frustrated me. And I must say, I have the same experience now. I ask questions, for example, about Oumuamua, and the scientists who pretend to be the adults in the room, dismiss the question. They say there is a cometary tail that we can't see. It's invisible around Oumuamua. There was a paper just a few months ago in Nature magazine, the most prestigious scientific journal, saying that Oumuamua had an invisible cometary tail around it. I felt like the kid in Hans Christian Andersen's Tale who said the emperor has no claws. The emperor here is Oumuamua. The claws are the cometary tail. I say what I see. I don't see any cometary tail. The scientific community didn't detect anything. So I say the emperor has no claws. And everyone around me says, no, you don't understand. The claws are invisible. They are beautiful. And, I just wonder, why is it that I'm the only one that is able to maintain his childhood curiosity?
Well, I mean, is it ego? You think when you go into the field of science, right? To me, it should all be about discovery, and you should be asking all these questions and using the evidence to guide you and lead you to more questions.
Well, that's in case you really care about nature, reality, trying to understand it and adapt to it. However, what happens in academia very often is you start caring about your ego, yourself. You want to show off. So you use the scientific inquiry as a sandbox to demonstrate how smart you are in order to get honors and awards. Once you do that, then you go in directions that do not necessarily follow curiosity, because all you want to do is create an echo chambers, of students and postdocs that repeat your mantras so that your voice will be heard loud, so that you will receive honors and awards. And if there is something that is risky, you might avoid it because you don't want to risk your reputation. So that's what one of my colleagues said about Oumuamua. He said, Oumuamua is so weird, I wish it never existed.
Wow. Well, that's disappointing because I am with you, and I am no scientist by any stretch of the imagination, but it just is natural to want to know more, right? And maybe that's what a journalist has in common with a scientist, because you just want to know more.
Exactly. And for the religious people, I would say the more we learn about nature, the more we may appreciate, what was created out there. It's just like examining a watch and seeing all the intricate machinery in the watch. It gives you an appreciation of the watchmaker.
I agree with that. And as I said earlier, I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive. I think that it actually tells us more about this incredible universe. It is so good to see you. So I want to talk with you again when you get back. And what I love is even what you just said. I wish maybe more politicians could apply that to themselves as well, in terms of the ego and echo chambers. But even if you find out that, hey, this is stuff that's been around and it's just pretty simple, right? In this, I'm going to call it a dig for lack of a better term, then it's just another piece of information. You could be proven wrong, but that's okay. Right? Because you move on, and it's more information that helps formulate a thesis for the future.
Exactly. And I would call it actually a fishing expedition in the case of the meteor. We don't know what kind of fish we will find. It's also a treasure hunt. If you think about interstellar trash being our treasure. And, one thing I hope to take with me is a hat of Indiana Jones on this trip, trying to see what we find, because it was depicted in the movies before, a scientific search for something really extraordinary. Let's see if we find an extraordinary evidence here.
Very exciting stuff. Very exciting. Avi Loeb, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.